Most people think you need some long 15-page contract in order to have a binding written agreement. That is absolutely not true. All you need are the material terms or the Q-tips that I described earlier, written down somewhere, anywhere. You can put an offer on the back of a paper towel if you want to. So long as the certain and definite terms of the offer are included, it doesn't matter what you put it on, how short it is, what kind of language you use, just write it down.
There's someone you should know.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BOMB Podcast. BOMB stands for Business of Music Bootcamp, which means that this is the place where we will drill down on the business and legal aspects of the music industry. Everything from copyrights and contracts to policies and practices. Whatever it takes to educate and empower you with the knowledge you need to make informed decisions about how to protect yourself and your music is what you'll find on the BOMB. I'm your host, Professor Butler, and as a retired entertainment attorney, former record label executive, music law professor, and college administrator, I have counseled thousands of artists and musicians on the intricacies of the music business. Now it's your turn.
The information in this podcast is not intended, nor should it be construed as legal advice. If you have questions of a legal nature, we strongly recommend that you contact an attorney in your local jurisdiction who specializes in music and/or entertainment law. For guidance, check out our website at professorbutler.com and sign up to receive a free resource on how to find the right lawyer for you. And now, your host of the BOMB Podcast, Professor Butler.
Hey everybody, welcome to the BOMB Podcast, episode number 12. I'm your host, Professor Butler, and in today's episode, we will explore the elements of a binding contract using Kelly Clarkson's recent lawsuit between her ex-manager/ex-husband as a backdrop. And because there is so much information for me to cover in just 1 week, I'll start with the elements of a valid verbal agreement in this episode. Then in 2 weeks, I'll continue the discussion of Kelly Clarkson's dispute. But instead of focusing on the contract itself, I'll hone in on specific parts of a management agreement, including the commission structure of the typical or standard artist management agreement. And hopefully by then, we'll have a little bit more information on Kelly's lawsuit so that I can fill in some of the blanks. Now, you just heard me say 2 weeks. That's right. Because now that school has started back, I have far less time on my hands than I had this summer. So because I want to be able to bring you the best, most well-researched content possible, I'll be releasing a new episode every other week rather than every week. Hopefully, just for now, until the end of the year. As always, I appreciate your support and hope that you continue to tune in on a bi-weekly basis, at least for the time being. All right, with that said, one of the reasons I chose the Kelly Clarkson lawsuit story is because I literally just had a student come to me with questions about a proposed verbal agreement with a manager she met on Instagram. Now, those of you who know me know how I feel about entering into verbal agreements or any kind of agreement with people that you meet on social media. For those of you tuning into the BOMB Podcast for the first time, I think you should know that I am not a fan of people who troll the internet looking for clients. I'm just not. I don't like it. We all got to make a living. I get that. We all need to meet new people, however and whenever we can. I get that too, especially during this age of COVID. But the people most negatively affected by this practice are disproportionately naive, inexperienced, and vulnerable young musicians who are eager to fall for a smooth talker trying to take advantage of their quest for fame and fortune. As a matter of fact, my first episode, entitled How Not to Get Scammed, covered this topic in detail. So be sure to take a listen about how to protect yourself against these types of predators. And speaking of predators, artist managers tend to get a really bad reputation for several reasons. I think it's mostly because of the handshake nature of many management agreements. Artists and managers rarely enter into formal agreements when they first meet because, why? They're getting to know each other and are basically trying each other out or trying each other on for size, which makes sense. The artist manager, also known as the personal manager, is one of the most personal of all relationships in the music business. Your manager is the one person outside of maybe your lawyer that you rely upon the most. They are there to guide you, advise you, and help steer the direction of your entire career. So that's why I'm not a fan of artists attaching themselves to strangers off the internet. Your manager should be someone that you know and trust and that supports you 100%, or that you come to know and trust over a period of time and extreme vetting. That's why I say that not all managers are out to make a quick buck off somebody else's talent. Some managers truly care about their clients and have only good intentions in mind and at heart. Matter of fact, I interviewed an artist by the name of Timar and her manager, Kareem James, a few weeks ago at Berkeley, and I'm telling you, they are most definitely the epitome of what a manager-artist relationship should look like, which is trusting, caring, competent, and supportive. That's the way I think things started out between Kelly Clarkson and her then husband, or soon-to-be husband, Brandon Blackstock. See, Kelly's manager at the time was Starstruck Management Group's Narvel Blackstock, who is her husband's father. And the father introduced Kelly to his son back in 2006. And although the son was already married at the time, once he became single in 2012, they started dating, and the rest is history. When they married in 2013, Brandon, who also managed Rascal Flatts and Blake Shelton, took over as Kelly's manager as well. Unfortunately, their marital bliss lasted for only 7 years because in June of this year, 2020, Clarkson filed for divorce, and with her soon-to-be ex-husband also becoming her soon-to-be ex-manager, as you can imagine, things began to get really messy because at some point, Clarkson stopped paying commissions to her husband/management company, and they are now taking her to court. The suit filed by Starstruck alleges that Clarkson has paid the firm $1.9 million this year alone, but owes them another $1.4 million for this year, and that they will likely be owed another $5.4 million by the end of 2020 in estimated commissions. According to court papers, Starstruck say that, quote, over the course of approximately 13 years, it developed Clarkson into a mega superstar. The quote continues, by way of example only, Starstruck claims that it was instrumental in helping Clarkson achieve success in terms of numerous hit albums, multiple Grammy wins and nominations, her role on a popular TV show like The Voice, and her own show called, it's a talk show called The Kelly Clarkson Show. And despite Starstruck's hard work and dedication, they say, Clarkson has decided she is going to stop paying them commissions for what is contractually owed. Now, I don't know about you, but if my husband is my manager and later becomes my ex-husband, it goes without saying that he's also going to become my ex-manager. So the issue isn't necessarily firing your husband or firing your manager. The problem here is that Clarkson and Nashville-based Starstruck entered into a verbal agreement sometime in 2007, which was just 5 years after Clarkson won the inaugural season of American Idol. And it's that contract that's the focus of today's episode, because that contract was not in writing. That's right, you heard me. Kelly Clarkson and Starstruck Management had a completely, or may still have, a completely verbal agreement. Now, I know what you're thinking. If it wasn't in writing, it can't be legal, right? It's probably not legal. Well, you're wrong. Because so long as a verbal agreement meets the requirements of a valid contract, It has the potential to be just as valid as a written agreement, so long as it isn't one of a small group of contracts that must be in writing to be valid. Now, I'll tell you what those contracts are that must be in writing to be valid in a minute. But first, let's take a look at what makes a contract valid in the first place. There are 3 elements or 3 requirements necessary for any contract, verbal or written, to be valid. Those elements are offer, acceptance, and consideration. Now let's take a look at these elements one by one and try to figure out if Kelly Clarkson's agreement, based on what we know so far, was valid and thus legally enforceable. First, there has to be an offer, meaning that someone must intend to enter into an agreement with another party and express that intention to the other party in certain indefinite terms. Second, there must be an acceptance, meaning that the person to whom the offer is made must agree to the exact terms or mirror image of the offer. And third, there must be consideration, meaning that there needs to be a bargained for exchange. Each party has to get something out of the agreement, and each party must give something up in order for there to be consideration. And whatever they exchange has to be of value to each person and must be bargained for, talked about, discussed, and agreed to. Once you have all 3 elements, you have a valid contract. But if one of those 3 elements is missing or seriously lacking in some way, a contract has not been formed and a contract does not exist. So, as a quick example, if I say, hey, want me to mix and master your song today for $50? That's an offer. And you say, yes, I'd like you to mix and master my song today for $50. That's an acceptance of my offer. And our bargained for exchange, because we probably talked about what you were going to do and how much we were going to charge, is that you get a mix and mastered song and I get $50. And conversely, I give up mixing and mastering services and you give up $50. Then we have consideration. Therefore, we now have a valid verbal agreement which can be enforced at common law. Now, you'll notice I listed 3 elements of a valid contract: offer, acceptance, and consideration. I never said anything about the contract or any of those elements needing to be in writing. That's because a writing is not absolutely necessary to form a valid agreement. Now, the reason I said absolutely necessary is that there is a common law concept known as the statute of frauds, or a concept known as the statute of frauds, which says that certain types of contracts, 5 of them to be exact, must be in writing in order to be legally enforceable. If the contract you are about to enter into is not on this list, then it does not have to be in writing to be enforced. The 5 types of contracts that must be in writing to be legally binding are: number 1, contracts for marriage. Any promise made in connection with marriage, such as a prenuptial agreement, must be in writing to be legal. Number 2, contracts for the sale of land. Any contract for the sale or transfer of real estate or real property must be in writing to be enforced. Number 3, surety agreements, which are basically promises to pay someone else's debt. That promise to pay somebody else's debt or somebody else's bills must be in writing to be enforced. Number 4, contract for the sale of goods, $500 or more. The sale of goods generally means any form of personal property that costs $500 or more. The sale of such goods needs to be in writing, and most sale of goods come with a receipt, by the way, which qualifies as a writing. More on that in a second. And finally, contracts that by their terms cannot be completed within a year. So if it takes more than 1 year to complete the terms of the agreement, then that agreement must be in writing to be enforced. Now, The 5 contracts that I just named still need to consist of a valid offer, acceptance, and consideration. The only difference is they must also be in writing. As for most contracts for personal services, they do not fit into any of these categories, and they do not need to be in writing. A verbal agreement for personal services may be perfectly legal, depending on its terms. So let's take Kelly Clarkson's case. We don't know, or we don't have any of the details yet. But the one thing we know for sure is that the reason we don't have any of the details is because no one wrote them down. Starstruck claims they had a verbal agreement. As to whether that verbal agreement is legally enforceable will be determined by whether it meets the requirements of a valid contract, meaning, did their verbal agreement consist of an offer, acceptance, and consideration? So let's take offer first. We defined an offer as someone must intend to enter into an agreement with another party and express that intention to the other party. So is it enough to say, hey, can I be your manager? Or, hey, want me to be your manager? The answer is absolutely not. In order for an offer to be valid, it has to include the terms of the agreement, also known as certain indefinite terms or material terms. Now, the acronym I learned in law school to help me remember certain indefinite terms was QTIPS, QTIPS, which stands for quantity, time, identity of the parties, price, and subject matter, which means at a minimum, in order for the offer to be valid, it needs to state the quantity of what you're buying, the time you're buying it, the identity of the person you're buying it from, the price you're paying, and a description of what you're paying for. That's why I said that a receipt is sufficient to formalize a contract, because on your receipt, it says how many pieces of equipment you're buying. Let's say you're buying audio equipment. How many you're buying, right? What time you're buying it, because the time is printed on the receipt. The identity of the person you're buying it from, because the name of the store is on the receipt. The price you're paying is on the receipt, and a description of what you paid for, meaning the brand or the type of equipment. So in order for an offer to be valid, it has to include information on what you're paying for, how much it costs, what you'll be doing or getting for your money, who you're entering the contract with, and when you're entering into the agreement, and maybe even how long the agreement is going to last. And if any of these certain, indefinite, or material terms or QTIPs are missing, then the offer itself is not valid. Now, of course, you can and should add much more detail, as much detail as possible to your offer. But so long as you have those QTIPs, you should have enough for an enforceable agreement. And any details that you may have left out will be determined by a judge. I just happen to be a big fan of Judge Judy. I also like shows like Judge Mathis and The People's Court. Now, if you've never watched these kind of shows, you really should check them out at least once, just to see the small claims court process in action. And small claims court is like a small local court where you take cases that are underneath a certain value. So in some states, anything worth less than $5,000 or less than $10,000, you don't take to municipal court where you need lawyers. You take to small claims court where you can represent yourself. And there's lots of TV shows out there on the small claims court process because it's actually kind of hilarious, depending on, of course, the judge and the litigants. If you watch one of these shows, you will see that the majority of the cases that come to small claims court are based on verbal agreements. They're what I call he said, she said cases that nobody put into writing. And it's the judge's job to figure out what the details of the agreement were and to fill in any missing pieces based on the facts and the testimony. The biggest problem we have with verbal agreements, the offer part in particular, is because it's not written down. right? And there is no law that says that the offer needs to be written down unless it meets the requirements of the statute of frauds. So here you are coming up with all these juicy little Q-tip details, but nobody can remember what they are because no one bothered to write them down. Now, this is the part where I pivot a little bit to talk about what constitutes a writing. Most people think that you need some long 15-page contract in order to have a binding written agreement. That is absolutely not true. All you need are the material terms or the Q-tips that I just described earlier, written down somewhere, anywhere. You can put an offer on the back of a paper towel if you want to. So long as the certain and definite terms of the offer are included, it doesn't matter what you put it on, how short it is, or what kind of language you use. Just write it down. Now, mind you, you'll notice that I said offer needs to be in writing, not necessarily contract. Remember, a contract requires offer, acceptance, and consideration, which means that both parties would have to sign that paper towel and exchange something of value for it in order for it to be considered a contract. And although there are any number of things at law that can go wrong with acceptance and consideration, the biggest and most common issue in contract almost always lies with the offer. What did the parties agree to in the first place? One more aside. When somebody hands you a piece of paper and they call it a contract, I need you to know, if you don't get anything else out of this episode today, I need you to know that that piece of paper that they hand you is not a contract. It's an offer. And an offer is just what it says. It's an offer to enter into a contract. It's an offer to enter into a binding agreement. It's like going to a restaurant and asking for a hamburger and they bring you a cheeseburger instead. If you ask for a hamburger and they come to your table and offer you a cheeseburger, what do? You send it back. Now, of course, you could accept it, but why are you accepting a cheeseburger when you know you don't like cheese? You're either allergic to cheese or cheese gives you gas. Why would you accept cheese when you didn't ask for cheese? It's the same thing with an offer, people. If the terms of the offer include something that you don't like, that you don't want, or that you didn't ask for, don't just accept the darn thing. Send it back. Just like you inspect your food, inspect your offer, which means to read the darn thing. And if you don't like how it looks, send it back. It's called making a counter offer. Don't think you have to accept whatever somebody gives you. If you don't like it or any part of it, send it back. Make a counter using the terms that you prefer instead. That's called negotiating. That's why consideration is a bargained for exchange. You didn't just take what they offered you. You bargained for it. You discussed it. You talked about it. You wheeled and dealed until you got what it is you really wanted. And like I said, if you don't get anything else out of today's episode, get that part. You are not obligated to accept anything written or verbal without first talking about it, discussing it, understanding it, reading it, and making sure it serves your best interest. So, back to Kelly Clarkson and Starstruck Management. If the agreement was verbal, how do we know what the terms were? Because she's going to say one thing, they're going to say another thing. Here comes the tricky part. The terms were either, because they weren't express, right? Which means they were either verbal, they were discussed, or they were implied. Think about what makes sense. When you watch Judge Judy, and she's been asked to render a decision in a case involving a verbal agreement, she always wants to know what the parties said. What did they discuss? What did they talk about? What did he say? What did she say? That's the only way to find out what the parties agreed to. In the Kelly Clarkson case, we don't know exactly what they said, but common sense dictates they had to have at least offered their management services for a percentage. Now, How do we know that what those services were and what the percentage was? Well, I'm no clairvoyant, but I believe that they offered her standard services at a standard 15% commission rate. How do I know that? Because according to the management company, and no one seems to argue this part, for 13 years, Kelly Clarkson paid them for standard management services at a standard 15% commission rate. So you would have to think they didn't or may not have actually said 15%, but you can imply that they agreed to 15% because she's been paying them 15% for 13 years. Oh, but it gets better. You see, even if they never did discuss the details or the specific terms of the agreement, or let's say they did discuss them, but they left some things out, the court can imply the missing terms based on the conduct of the parties and what is custom or standard in the industry. And this is where Starstruck might have a case. If you and I never discussed putting cheese on your hamburger, but every time I brought you a cheeseburger, you ate it and you didn't complain, I can't then come along 13 years later and say that I didn't ask for a cheeseburger or that I don't want a cheeseburger. Get it? I must be hungry. Now, according to Starstruck, they provided management services to Clarkson since 2007. So they have somewhat of a description if those services are standard, and they have time, meaning sometime in 2007. So they're kind of meeting some of the Q-tip requirements. In their court papers, you can tell that they're making the argument that the terms of the verbal/implied agreement are based on industry practice, whereby, number one, verbal agreements are common in the music industry, especially between managers and artists. And number two, the standard deal consists of management services in exchange for a 15% share of income from music and entertainment projects. And yes, you can negotiate for a higher percentage or you can negotiate for a lower percentage, but the standard is usually around 15%. The lawsuit also explains in detail the conversations that occurred back then between Blackstock Sr., which is Kelly's husband, and Kelly, her lawyer, and her business manager. Now, this is what Starstruck claims. They said they had conversations with Kelly Clarkson and her lawyer and her business manager, which means that there were several people involved in the negotiations, aka the discussions, aka the consideration, aka the bargained for exchange. And although there was no written agreement, you can't tell me that there aren't some letters somewhere, there's statements, there's emails, there may even be text messages. I don't know about that though, as far as back as 2007, but you could text on a BlackBerry or a pager that indicated the existence of an agreement and at least some of its terms. There has to be something somewhere, and that's what Starstruck is counting on. But the real issue in this case is not whether or not there's a verbal contract whereby most of the terms are implied by conduct and industry practice, because we can pretty much see that. That's kind of undeniable after 13 years of commissions. The real problem here is the length of the agreement, how you get out of the agreement, and for how long the services are supposed to last. In particular, how long after the contract is Starstruck entitled to receive commissions. This is also known as post-term commissions. In every management agreement, there are post-term commissions that say, even after you fire me, even after I am no longer your manager, I am entitled to receive commissions for a period of time afterwards, called post-term commissions. And I don't care what nobody say. I do not believe that that is something that they discussed, but I bet you the court is going to imply what those post-term commissions are. And that is going to have to be the subject of my next episode. So stay tuned for that. So what did we learn today? Well, First, we learned that verbal agreements are totally 100% legally enforceable, depending on their terms, and that they are very common in the music business, in particular between artists and managers. Number two, that most contracts is the other thing we learned. Most contracts don't have to be in writing unless they fall within the statute of frauds, which includes contracts for marriage, real property, the debt of another, the sale of goods for $500 or more, or contracts that cannot be performed within a year, which we'll discuss more next time as well. We also learned that in order to form a valid contract, written or verbal, you must have an offer, acceptance, and consideration, which is a bargain for exchange. We also learned that in order for an offer to be valid, just the offer part, it has to include certain and definite terms. But finally, we discovered that if those certain and definite terms are missing, especially in a verbal agreement, that they can be implied by either conduct and or industry practice. Whew. Next time, I'll break down some of the more problematic terms of a management agreement. And hopefully by then we'll have more information on the Starstruck versus Clarkson case to share. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you, audience, so much for your support. Thank you for your patience with me as I, navigate through this whole world of podcasting. And I can't wait to see you next time. Take care. Thanks for joining me on the Bomb Podcast. If you were educated, empowered, or inspired by what you heard, please subscribe today to be the first to receive the latest episode. And don't forget, post a review, tell a friend, follow me on social media, and join my tribe at ProfessorButler.com.